Hi, this is Jeff Kober, and we welcome you to Disney Insights. Thanks for your patience. For last week, I was part of I was the head of a family reunion where our entire children came together up in the woods and in the cabin. And then because of the whole experience, I just didn't really have an opportunity to bring out a podcast, and I apologize for that. I really look forward to podcasts every week, and so my apologies for not having one. But that said, prior to that family reunion, I visited Disneyland and their 70th anniversary a couple of weeks ago. And there is so much to talk about when it comes to this celebration of the happiest place on earth. But the primary reason, the primary driver I felt that drew me to come at this time was a new show at the Opera House on Main Street. I feel there is not one, but two stories about the new attraction, Walt Disney, A Magical Life. This is, of course, the highly sophisticated and highly controversial animatronic show of Walt Disney. And I have much to say about that show experience. And to understand all this, you have to understand efforts made earlier to help people relate to who Walt Disney is, to include the Walt Disney Story, One Man's Dream, and even Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. So this is a deep dive review for sure. But there is a larger conversation about how Disney is reconnecting more people to what they once loved in their youth, experiences that foster ties. It's as if Disney has finally realized that their history, their heritage, and their stories really do matter to the fans around them. And they seem to be doing much more moving toward that and building on that theme. So this podcast looks at Walt Disney's magical life and so much more. This podcast is produced by myself and Performance Journeys, which offers training and development and consultants support to organizations big and small and to entrepreneurs new and established. With a wide variety of resources and long-time in-the-trench experience, we offer workshops, online learning, coaching, and much more to organizations that want to build their teams, raise organizational excellence, improve leadership, and create customer loyalty. All this comes at the intersection where we bring best in business Disney practices to you through these forums. So check us out at performancejourneys.com. And please support us by not only subscribing to this podcast, but offering up a positive rating, review, or referral to others. Be sure to check out Disney Insights, where we also offer a lot of the key points, photos, videos, links, and more that are going to tie back to the very things we're talking about today. And when you get a chance, check out our YouTube and Facebook page, Disney Insights. We have a lot of new videos from Disneyland, and we've got a lot more to come. So without further ado, let's talk about Walt Disney, A Magical Life. There was so much to see and do during Disneyland's 70th anniversary. I assure you, I was completely worn out. In fact, there was one experience. I wanted to see a show in front of Small World. It's a Small World. And it came, the only way I was going to see the show was to see it at 11:45 that night. And it was the last night we were there. And I got to tell you, I had to back down. I was so worn out. But I caught some amazing things over at Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. I have so much to share about 70th anniversary. It will come very shortly after this podcast. But the primary focus, my primary reason for visiting at this time was to see Walt Disney, A Magical Life. People have asked since I saw it what I thought. And I guess I would say good, not great. And I was really hoping for great. But there's a lot of context behind that answer that doesn't really make it a simple answer. And I see its potential in being great. So let's look at what's working and what's not. And that requires a contextual look at the show. One that actually takes me back in time because I remember seeing back in the 1960s Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln came after the World's Fair. It came and became home in the mid-60s, I think in 65. at Disneyland. And the show always had two sections. There was no foyer gallery per se, kind of a front end thing, but really you actually went into one of two theaters. And the first was a sort of standing theatrical presentation. I often talk about these, you know, how you kind of go back and forth in a queue. This thing had a very creative queue of kind of processing people in a way so that when the doors to the second theater opened, that you were kind of lined up to each of the rows of the sitting portion of the theater. But the first portion was a standing theatrical presentation of Abraham Lincoln's life story. And then the doors opened again, and a second sitting presentation of great moments with Mr. Lincoln occurred as an animatronic. Lincoln's script was an amalgamation of quotations that he had made in his life, all put together in one whole. I want to say Marty Sklar played a role in that, maybe others, but the whole of it was really not just one speech he made. Now, in Hall of Presidents, he does give the Gettysburg Address currently in that presentation. But even that original Hall of Presidents show was the same kind of amalgamation of quotations that were all kind of brought together. And then the show would end on a dramatic piece of music, which originally was the Battle Hymn of the Republic, and then in later years became Golden Dreams from the American Adventure. The show format was, again, replicated in the Hall of Presidents, only, of course, with a lot more presidents, a lot more figures. Originally, it was just, again, a theatrical presentation at the beginning, kind of the history of America, and then the curtains rose. You saw the Hall of Presidents. They were all introduced one by one, and then Lincoln would speak a similar address, slightly shorter than the one he gave in Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. Then the additions occurred over the last 15 years or so, where we had a current U.S. president who would say something, or maybe at least give the oath of office, and then also some words from George Washington, which then gave way to Lincoln speaking midway through the theatrical presentation. Again, why I'm talking about this is because there were two formats, two parts to this presentation: a theater presentation, a film-like presentation, and then the animatronic presentation. Where this really changed was the American Adventure. The American Adventure had both components, but they weaved them together. They sought to change out that format by mixing both the animatronic and the theatrical presentation. And beautifully done so. You'll notice when you see the theatrical portion on the screen, it actually, the artistic style presented is based on the artistic styles of that time, what people do. And then we get into black and white photography, and then we get into color photography. So it evolves throughout the presentation, but always with these set of animatronics. And one of the things that makes that work as an experience is that while you have this big array of fairly sophisticated animatronics, certainly sophisticated for its time when Epcot opened, it was one of the premier shows and experiences at Epcot. While you had all these animatronics going on, you still had things that were going on presentationally in the background, theatrically, through images and photos and video. Any rate, that's a little hint to what I think should have been done with Walt Disney: A Magical Life, and what actually ended up happening. However, we fast forward to what is called the Walt Disney World, or the Walt Disney Story. This show took over Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln in 1973. It also occupied the Hospitality House on Town Square at Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World. So it was in the Opera House, the same kind of physical location on the right as you come into Town Square at Disneyland, and then it became part of the Hospitality House on the right, which is now a Mickey Mouse meet and greet area, next to Tony's, which was a different restaurant back in that day and era. But notwithstanding, it took place there, the Walt Disney Story. And it had a longer narrative that was all done by Walt Disney. He speaks the entire narrative. There is no host narrator. It was done kind of in a photo book. In fact, it began with a kind of a big photo book, and it opens up and you see pictures from Walt Disney's ancestors and his life. It covers things that are not covered in One Man's Dream or later on, which I'll get to. It talked about Doc Sherwood in the early days when he was just a boy, and how he, for a dime, he drew his horse, Doc Sherwood's horse, Rupert, for a dime for Doc Sherwood. Dad was sick. He talks about that and how they had to go around town and post stories of an auction in order to sell off everything that was on the farm. He talks about, in a bigger, elongated way, his efforts to get into World War I. He talks about his efforts to get into the cartoon market and how he did Alice in Cartoonland. He speaks of the silly symphonies and color with flower and trees. He talks about how the Three Little Pigs were an opportunity to develop individual personality, and how that led to his early exposure, well, to Snow White, and to which he also talks about his early exposure in his youth to Snow White when he saw it as a silent film in the theaters. He talks about the individual development of the dwarfs and, again, their personality. He talks about challenges with Fantasia and how he wished he could have done some other things to plus it up. He talked about work during World War II, plus some 4,000 insignias that were done on planes and so forth. He talked about educational films becoming true life adventures. He does this comparison between Cinderella and Alice in Wonderland, and how one worked and one didn't work because you learned to love the character. He saw that laughter and tears, you needed to feel both things in a character. He then went through Disneyland and talked about the different lands and what they meant to him. And then it ended with a showcase of newly opened Walt Disney World Florida project and the upcoming City of the Future, Epcot. This is actually the first public exposure. He had done presentations for Florida state government, but this was the first time this Epcot City of the Future was presented in the parks to guests. And his message in this whole thing, after he goes through his whole life story, he then ends with a story about his brother and how he was a postman and how he had the better life because he was able to go camping, going fishing, and he was the lucky Disney, as he would put it. And that was kind of the whole Walt Disney story. It was much longer than other productions. Again, he was the host of the film, and his narrative was one of a back and forth of, yeah, I became successful, but really I'm just like you. We had tough times. I had to go work in the war. We all had struggles and so forth. The Walt Disney Story was somewhat controversial at Disneyland, at least. Played for many years at Walt Disney World, but it was somewhat controversial at Disneyland as it took over Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, suggesting in a backhanded way that Walt Disney was more important than America's 16th president. The result was that in 1975, they kind of combined things, and they made the Walt Disney Story featuring Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln as part of the foyer gallery show. That part took place out there with a video screen talking about Walt's life, and then everyone went into Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, with him playing host in the theater. And when the curtains raised at that point, it was just Lincoln presenting, followed by the Battle Hymn of Republic. There was no real history at the beginning of that presentation at that point. It was just going straight into Lincoln's presentation. Now, much of the pre-show display for the Walt Disney Story, especially at Disneyland, had actually in that original Walt Disney Story, they actually had not one but both offices of Walt Disney that had been meticulously moved and displayed over in glass booths. Very impressive presentation there. And there were a lot of other displays. I believe that, for instance, Snow White with the individual little seven dwarfs were also on display in there, and other awards and images of Walt Disney. All of that was quickly removed in cardboard boxes just after Ron Miller was moved from the company in 1984 and Michael Eisner was put in. It was a very messy moment in which Lillian and her family, Diane, Ron, they were not happy with the direction the company was going, and they literally took back everything that they had from their estate back home. Any rate, time passes, and ultimately, the equivalent of the Walt Disney Story came in the form of Walt Disney Presents One Man's Dream, which premiered in 2001 at Disney's Hollywood Studios on the 100th anniversary of Walt Disney's birth. That's when we had the big sorcerer hat, and we'll come back to that a little later. Remember the sorcerer hat that was in front of the Chinese theater? It also included an impressive museum-style showcase, which still is there, and at that time actually included one of those Walt's two offices. It's actually components of that is what's presented in this new version at Disneyland. But at any rate, after you went through all of those, that museum-style showcase and so forth, you enter a theater, and there you saw One Man's Dream, narrated by Julie Andrews. It's a shorter version of the Walt Disney Story, and it talks about key things: tough times on a farm, working as a kid with a paper route, joining the army, starting his own business, having business failure early on, first big success, struggles during the war, growth and corresponding debt, the ultimate success with Disneyland and so forth, and even a discussion about the Florida Project and Epcot. Well, that has been going on for many years. Sometimes they take out the film to show a preview of an upcoming Zootopia movie or some kind of Marvel movie or something, but by and large, you see this presentation at Disney's Hollywood Studios, and it's a good one. It's a solid one, and it's a great way to get a break during the middle of the day when it's hot and humid during the summertime. A couple of years ago, as part of the 100th presentation, D23 did a exhibit that went around the world, really, certainly to Europe as well as through the U.S. In fact, it may actually be playing somewhere out there still. In it, as a setup to the D23 experience, there's a little presentation where you see Mickey, Sorcerer Mickey, and he conjures up Walt. But in this presentation, he's conjuring up Walt as portrayed by artificial intelligence. This is a very short 1-minute presentation, and the dialogue includes the following. Lots of satisfaction developing an idea and believing in it all the way, as Walt talks about. And then his comment, there's no secret to our approach. We're always opening new doors, and curiosity leads us to new things, and so forth. The visual presentation of this, it was just kind of like an image put onto glass. It looks a little more like Tom Hanks than Walt Disney, but at that time, that's what AI was able to give you. The concept was really kind of intriguing. And I would suppose that his mannerisms, as well as his language, was taken from the largest array of Walt Disney footage as was possible. That created the kind of quotations and experiences you have. Speaking of Tom Hanks, by the way, in Saving Mr. Banks, which could be a whole nother comparison to Understanding Walt, I thought his performance, his looks weren't bad. His narrative approach was actually even better, and probably his mannerisms were what really made Saving Mr. Banks work, or made him work as Walt Disney in Saving Mr. Banks. I say this whether it's great moments with Mr. Lincoln or or the Walt Disney Story, or Walt Disney Presents One Man's Dream, or even this AI presentation, I provide all of this as a context because it's all leading up to this idea that we're going to do an animatronic version of Walt Disney. Now, I'm not going to get into the politics of what the family felt, or members of the family felt, in terms of this being done. Nor do I really believe that any quotations that there was. Blaine Gibson, I believe, offers a quotation that Walt didn't want an animatronic, and I believe somebody else also provided a quotation of such. I don't know that those quotations, I believe that maybe he may have said that, but I believe it was in the context of what Walt Disney understood as animatronics at the time. I also think that Walt Disney was never I don't think he was ever really trying to exalt himself. It was always about the park. It wasn't really about him. And so I think something that celebrated him, and I think something that to ask him at that time, when his biggest project, or one of his biggest projects, was Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, was to kind of say, hey, can you are you as important in an animatronic as Lincoln was? I don't think Walt would have ever agreed to an animatronic, nor did he know really where animatronics were going. However, that said, there was a decision made to create Walt Disney: A Magical Life, and it begins in the Disneyland Gallery, where we see much of Walt's connection to Disneyland. I'm going to talk about that a little later on, but then we move into the theater, where we see a presentation that is parallel to One Man's Dream. I say parallel, but honestly, it's almost identical. The curtains then ultimately rise up, and then Walt appears at his desk, or some pieces of what would be his office, and he delivers a short message composed of statements he's made over the years. Those statements include: first, my greatest reward was to build this organization and have the public accept it after all these years. Second, my brother was a mailman and he had all the fun. He's the smart Disney. Third, do I draw Walt Disney? Do I draw Mickey Mouse? No, I was asked by a child that question. In truth, I am more like a bee that goes from place to place offering pollen. He then talks about there's no secret to our approach. We keep moving forward because we are curious. And then he finally ends it with, and we have to remember it all began with the mouse. That is the substance of his presentation. His words are a combination of statements made at the end of the Walt Disney Story and at the end of One Man's Dream. The one statement not made is around quality will out. And let me just back up and say, having worked with the Disney Institute and having dealt with this footage, much of this footage all my life, there are certain footage pieces that he has that have stuck out over the years. And by the way, this makes me almost non-qualified to really do a review of this show, because I have just seen these pieces and have worked with them for many, many years. One of them is Quality Will Out, and it's a great piece that he uses in the Walt Disney Story. But then he goes on, I think it is, but then he goes on to say that we'll hang on after Disney. And that seems a little awkward now, being stated by an animatronic. So that has not been included. That may have also been in One Man's Dream as well. But because if there's a difference between One Man's Dream and Walt Disney: A Magical Life, it is that very ending piece, which is now substituted by the animatronic. As he concludes his words, then the music ends with When You Wish Upon a Star, sung by Jiminy Cricket in the film Pinocchio. Very similar to how, again, One Man's Dream ends in that production. So that's kind of what the show is. You have this One Man's Dream presentation remade, and then you have an animatronic of Walt offering about 5 different quotes that he made over his lifetime, followed by some music that brings you to a conclusion. So, all of that said and done, giving all that context to all those shows and what is now there. And by the way, of course, if you go to my YouTube page or go to DisneyInsights.com, you will see links to that whole show. You should you decide whether or not you want to look at it or whatnot. But here's what. Well, let's just say that the list of what's not working in this show is actually longer than the list of what's working. But what's working is so much more important than what's not. So let's get what's not over with so we can really build on the what is working, because that really is what matters. The first is that the format of this show follows Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln and the Hall of Presidents. You have to sit through a lot of film to get to the animatronic. And I say this is a problem because it's a repeatability issue. It is, at least for me, because I've seen One Man's Dream so many times. And I didn't even go back to the Walt Disney Story, which is the longer version of it. I think at some point you're going to reduce interest because people are going to want to see the animatronic, but they're not going to want to go through nearly 15 minutes in order to get to that animatronic. So that is a challenge. The film itself, as I have said, is a near copy of One Man's Dream. What is the difference? Julie Andrew hosts the original One Man's Dream. In this version, Bob Iger provides that narrative. Nothing against Bob Iger. I think he's fantastic on many levels, but I don't think it adds to the narrative that he is. It adds to the importance of the narrative, but it doesn't add to the richness of the narrative like it does with Julie Andrews. And I don't quite see, other than maybe a legal issue we haven't paid her, I don't see why she couldn't have had her voice in it where he has his. At any rate, that's just so you know, if you've seen One Man's Dream a lot, then you're going to see the same thing when you pretty much get to the Walt Disney experience. Disney invited, at the beginning of this, selected media to take a peek prior. Social media people, networks, so forth. This became problematic. First off, it was, sometimes I do take a peek ahead of time before I actually saw the parade on video, because I was going to leave for California shortly thereafter. I took a lot of peeks at, I really studied the video of Disney Starlight Dream the Night Away before I saw it. I didn't see anything of Test Track, or as little as I could of Test Track 3.0 before I went and saw it. Where I'm going with this is that it was hard to even look at anything on Facebook, Instagram, or whatever without seeing the social media up front. And it didn't offer a very positive view of the animatronic work and effort that had gone into Walt Disney. Those close-ups are not what you see of Lincoln and the presidents when you see the Hall of Presidents or Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, and they just threw that camera as close as they could to Walt Disney. And there is a lot of perfection in the effort, but there's a lot of imperfection in it, and it didn't work. And I was really bummed out that I had to see it that way up front. I was trying to avoid it. I never did see the show until I saw the show. At that point, then I really became disappointed by the fact that it was so much of One Man's Dream before we got to the animatronic, and that if I was going to see it several times, I was going to have to repeat the same thing as well. By the way, the first time I viewed it from the back row of the theater because of this sense of if I'm going to give Walt, this animatronic, a chance of looking like Walt, I'm going to start with the back of the theater and move up. And it was okay. And in fact, it was interesting because I was sitting next to a number of guest relations hosts, and they also were watching it and seeing it, and they too in the back, they had a positive experience from it. And I had a fairly positive view of the animatronic from that. So the second time around, and on my first video taping of it, of the entire show, I sat in the very middle center. And that was okay too. Um, but then the third time around, I came right down center on the left side as you face the stage. Now, so you understand this. In the foyer is a bust of Walt Disney, is one of Lincoln too, and it's a perfect likeness of Walt, as is other efforts such as the partner statue. It just really looks like Walt Disney. So it's not like they can't create an image of Walt Disney. They do, and they do it very well. Unfortunately, all that falls apart with this animatronic. It's a little like a kid getting braces. It's still the same kid, but the kid looks different with all the hardware in the mouth. The same problem occurs here. And by the way, the same problem occurs in the Hall of Presidents. It was interesting. Trump looked horrible, but he didn't look so bad after his first term in terms of resembling him. The same thing with Barack Obama. I didn't think he looked good as an animatronic, but after his term, he looked better when they took out all the hardware that was no longer needed in his face. They have done some amazing things, and you do see this kind of twinkle in his eye kind of thing, but that effort toward the animatronic, it may have been a case where less would have been a little bit more, because it really does detract from really trying to create his face to look just like his face. Now, despite the wow effect, there is a wow effect of Walt moving from a lean back position. By the way, I'm not giving a spoiler per se here, because this was mentioned long ago in the previous announcements. Walt moves from a lean back position, kind of leaning back on his desk, to standing erect and even taking a step forward. However, the look seems a little slouchy. This improves when you're down front, and this is why I did my third viewing on the front row on the left of the theater. I wanted to see how his angle played out when you did, and it did look a lot better when you were at that angle. Not a great angle to see the whole show, but it did look a little better. But from middle of the theater in the back, it does look a little slouchy when he's sitting there, which you do slouch when you lean back, but it tends to make him look a lot shorter and so forth. At any rate, because there's no media during his actual animatronic presentation, you are left simply staring at the animatronic, which is the benefit of the American adventure. You kind of have a chance to move your eyes back and forth between media and animatronic, and that makes it work, I think, a lot better. The presentation he actually makes as an animatronic, it starts about 14 minutes and 15 seconds into the show, and then it ends a little after 17 seconds. So we're talking not a long show here. Longer than the AI version was, but not really very long. It is those 5 sets of quotations that I talked about earlier, and they're all put together, and then the music's up and Jiminy Cricket begins singing. And to that effect, I love, thank you for using When You Wish Upon a Star. No problem with that. However, and I've become somewhat tearful watching One Man's Dream and seeing that portion. But here it just felt like, okay, we already did this. And I felt like I just expected more of an emotional ending. And it wasn't as tear-filled for me. Now, here's the great news. I think ultimately these things could be improved upon as the organization has more time to create a more when I say more time, remember that they were supposed to offer this back in May when they started all the events, and they moved it to the birthday of Disneyland on July 17th. So what could happen with a little bit more time? It's interesting because this parallels a little bit of the experience of featuring Mr. Lincoln at the World's Fair. Robert Moses was insistent that Lincoln and the Pieta be both at the World's Fair in New York City. But when it was time to actually do the first presentation, Lincoln was not performing. And so it was actually several weeks later. Walt had to apologize to those who had paid big money for this presentation, the state of Illinois and so forth. But at the end of the day, he had to he had to postpone until Lincoln was at a better place. And it did work in the end. I wondered if they had more time on Walt Disney, what they might be able to do that would engage the audience throughout. It just feels like, oh, we don't have a lot of time. Why don't we take that One Man's Dream film and we'll put 4 or 5 quotations together. I don't think that works for this presentation. This will likely need a more animatronic media mix, like the American Adventure, than waiting. And you could have him out there for the whole time, but have the lights go down as he talks, as screen images talk about World War II or building Disneyland, and maybe have multiple screens so your eye is constantly visually moving and flowing, so that you really get you get this mix of events, and then you feel like, okay, I've really had a chance to see this Walt Disney animatronic in the context of his whole life story and not just in the context of 4 quotations at the end. I think this will also support another little challenge which I have, which is around audio mix. And I ran into an Imagineer who was sitting both times at the exit, and I said, okay, obviously you're an Imagineer because you're not only dressed casual, but your name tag is turned around so that nobody can see you're from Imagineering. And he kind of laughed, and we talked a few moments. He was trying to figure out the problem with the audio, which people have commented. And what he was trying to do was, when you got to the animatronic piece, he wanted it to sound like it was truly him speaking on the stage outward. And I didn't have a real problem with this, and I really liked the intent of doing that. But it's prefaced by this One Man's Dream, where you have a full theatrical sound, and then all of a sudden we come to him just standing there at the presentation. I think it needs to be, again, if you move the visuals and the media with the animatronic and create one show and not just a show in 2 parts, you can address this audio mix challenge. So, all that said, those are the many things that do not work about this show. What does work? And this really does matter. People, first of all, are visiting this attraction. They're curious and they're filling the room. Capacity-wise, this looks like a hit, at least in the initial run. And I say in the initial run because I think, remember, there are a lot of repeat guest visitation from locals at Disneyland. So they're all going to want to see what this show looks like. They're going to be coming and coming and coming and coming. But after you have to put up with the movie for so long, just seeing the animatronic may not be long enough. Or for 4 minutes or 3 minutes is not going to be long enough. So again, that's a challenge. Again, the animatronic doesn't look too bad, particularly if you sit in the back or at least in the middle. Moreover, what I think is really important here is you have to applaud Disney for doing something difficult and by no means on the cheap. This was an investment of money to build off of the heritage of the man who made this whole thing possible. And added to it, it's going to be a rotating show with great moments with Mr. Lincoln. So we're not missing that either. It's going to have to be modified a little bit. But it too will be coming back in time after the initial run of this show. And then people are learning so much more about who Walt Disney is. I've heard a lot of people say, oh, I had no idea of the challenges he had in life creating what he created. Well, let me tell you, you still don't know, because he had some really difficult challenges that even he doesn't talk about in One Man's Dream or the Walt Disney Story. That I have to save for another day, because I think the more people know of the struggle, the more they appreciate the man and who he is. And I think, as fans know, that's a big part of what really inspires people about Disney as an organization. At the end of the day, you really want to see how, it didn't just start with a mouse. It started with a man who really, and a brother, who really went through lifelong struggles to create what we enjoy today. And I'll finally say that the show is accompanied by a spectacular gallery presentation prior and a post-show tribute, which I'll talk about in a second. In fact, this brings us to something even bigger than the experience of seeing Walt Disney as an animatronic. Despite how poorly the company's 100th anniversary and the 50th anniversary for Walt Disney World was, there is seemingly a renewed interest and effort in really celebrating the history and heritage of all things Disney. Now, I know you're probably thinking to yourself, you got to be kidding me. You just closed off Rivers of America and Tom Sawyer Island and so forth, and Muppets 3D, which goes back a number of years and so forth. So I appreciate where people are coming from in that context. But let's take a little bit more of a look at some of the things that are happening. One of them is that before you arrive at the Opera House, this really lovely tribute, of course, we all know about the windows on Main Street and how it credits so many of the Imagineers and artists and designers who made Disneyland and Walt Disney World possible. But there is one that has never been placed up there, and its time has really come, and it's called Bountiful Blooms, and it's a tribute to Lillian Bounds Disney, who, as she has put it, inspiring worlds of color and happiness. Lillian loved lilies. Sorry, got that backwards. In fact, when the architect for the Walt Disney World Concert Hall, which Lillian made possible in Los Angeles, when he first came to visit Lillian, he walked in and he saw stems of lilies coming out of a glass vase. And that was his original motivation for the unique design of the Walt Disney Concert Hall. And so there's tribute to Lillian Disney there on a little porch with some other things. There's a little Mickey Mouse doll sitting on the thing, and there's other little touches, but they didn't have to. They didn't need to do anything there, and yet they did. They put in a very lovely touch to Lillian Disney. The second is, which I've referenced a couple of times here, is the Disney Gallery, which is the pre-show foyer to A Magical Life with Walt Disney, which has gone full throttle to create a presentation and tribute of Disneyland's 70th anniversary. In it, you step in it, you see all sorts of amazing things. First off, hundreds of designs that were done for rides and attractions in each of the themed lands, and they're all showcased throughout on different boards and so forth. You see a tribute to different Mickey Mouse hats that have occurred over the years. You step into an animatronic display, which was very cool. We talked about the early animatronics in Adventureland in my previous podcast on Adventureland. We talked about the individual who created the first animatronics there, who, by the way, went on to create Jaws, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. Any rate, you see this presentation of animatronics, very cool. And then through a glass display, you see original artifacts from the apartment Walt Disney had above Main Street, above Town Square. And they are original artifacts that have been borrowed from the Walt Disney Museum in San Francisco. It's more true to what actually the apartment looked like during Walt's time than what the apartment looks like now when you tour it. And it's a glass presentation of the couches and tables and lamps and so forth. Very cool presentation. Wards at Walt Disney had really a great celebration of Walt Disney's heritage. Then, as you exit, there is both a mural on the right side and then a dedication to the cast members of Disneyland with different photos, very unique, very a wide variety of different roles and different time periods on the characters. The mural is just stunningly beautiful. It caught my attention because the first thing you see as you come out of the theater is actually the a drawing of the first parade float for American Parade with the eagle on top. Very cool. And then you see images of the castle, of Haunted Mansion, of pirates, of Space Mountain. It's just a lovely tribute to Disneyland as you exit the theme. Similarly, as you exit the Opera House and you go down Main Street, you come to the Main Street Cinema, which unfortunately is a store at Walt Disney World, but here it is still a theater. And when you step in this multi-screen arena, you see a tribute to the Sherman Brothers and to a song that was written, a third verse that was written to It's a Small World prior to Richard Sherman's death. And it's sung by a number of people. It's just really, it's very sweet. It's a very tender moment. It doesn't take more than a couple of minutes. You can actually see the video on Disney Insights and see what it's all about. But it's part of the whole of the, well, it's not just part of the 70th anniversary. That new third verse is not only in Disneyland's It's a Small World, but it also is now playing in the finale of the Walt Disney World's version as well. So, and I'll show video upcoming of that for those who want to see that. Now, if we were to move over to Walt Disney World, it's not a small thing that just last year, World Celebration chose to add a Walt Disney statue at the base of Spaceship Earth, overlooking the rest of the park. It's a reminder that really what started was not just so much a mouse, but a man. And that Dreamer statue is just really excellent there. And then a little tiny thing, and it's a very subtle thing, we talked about 2 podcasts ago in the 3.0 of Test Track. There's a very casual nod to the Fun to Be Free melody as you ride along in that attraction. It's very subtle. There's also some other subtle things you see that allude back to World of Motion, but it's still appreciated. Fans appreciate that effort that you make to acknowledging your heritage and history. Even better than that is that in our last podcast, we spoke about the unique, magical, dreamlike qualities that play in Disney's Starlight Dream the Night Away. So excited to come back to that parade. Now, when I get to the 70th anniversary, I have to acknowledge that Paint the Night really does blow away all parades. But this is still a maybe more apple-orange comparison, but this is a beautiful parade. And what makes it wonderful is the acknowledgments it makes to both the Main Street Electrical Parade and to Spectro Magic as you watch it. While I was away between Disneyland and coming back home, I had a chance with my family to go see Fantastic Four. Again, this is a very deep cut, but during the initial initial 15% upfront portion of the film, they do this little montage scene and they make a very deep cut into the Old People Mover Nation on Wheels song that was written by George Bruns. Again, it's tailored for the most ardent Disney fan, but you go crazy. And of course, Fantastic Four is actually making appearances at Disneyland, not in Avengers Campus, but at Disneyland Tomorrowland. And that speaks volumes because Disney has acknowledged, Iger acknowledged nearly 10 years ago Tomorrowland needed help at Disneyland. This has possibilities. It really could be very cool. And I'm very excited to see. If you have not seen that film, I will tell you, not to get off track, but I will tell you it has quickly become my favorite Marvel film, if not one of my favorites. I really love this film, and it does some things really, really well, and I encourage you to go see it. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, in terms of the company really acknowledging its heritage and its history, was an announcement that came while I was away. And that is a Disney animation-inspired experience coming to Disney's Hollywood studios. So this is the basis of this attraction. First of all, it's in the same place where the magic of Disney animation occurred for so many years, and then it was changed up with a Star Wars theme for to get guests excited about Galaxy's Edge when it came. But the heart and premise of this is based on Once Upon a Studio. If you have not seen this short, go to Disney Plus. It is so beautiful because it shows artists leaving the studios, the Walt Disney Animation Studios in Burbank, California, and the characters come alive. And because it's the 100th anniversary, they're all lining up outside for a photo, and they're all gathering together, and all the craziness of that, and don't put Goofy in charge of the camera, and all these kinds of things. It is it's the best part of the 100th anniversary. It's probably one of the best things that ever came out of Disney in ever. It is so beautiful. Well, they're building this new attraction experience based on that Once Upon a Studio film. It's going to be housed in a building reminiscent of the iconic Roy E. Disney Animation Building. In other words, it's going to get a makeover. And the magic of Disney animation is going to then come alive. That's the title of the attraction, The Magic of Disney Animation. They already have put out a poster for it. You see every possible Disney character coming alive, from the Mad Hatter to Stitch to Moana to Hercules. They're all coming out alive. What's really cool is, as they transform this from what was Star Wars Launch Bay, they're going to recreate the Mickey's iconic sorcerer hat, which is actually part of the building in the animation building in California, and is a real callback to the animation hat, or the sorcerer hat that was in front of the Chinese theater. I didn't like the location of the hat. I liked the hat. I didn't like the location of that hat. But at any rate, the idea is the whole thing is going to be, again, cast with a spell of pixie dust. And in their story, in this newly reimagined space, the animators have, again, temporarily stepped away, but the building is still buzzing with activities as the characters come to life and they're ready to play. So you're going to go in and you're going to interact with and explore silly takes on the iconic Disney animation headquarters, including many of the studio departments. Only this time, some of Disney Pals will come out and you'll have character moments. They're going to be different interactive experience. You'll see portraits just like in the film that we talked about, the Once Upon a Studio. You'll see portraits come to life, where you'll be able to, well, there's several things. You're going to be able to see these interactive portraits come to life. In another section, you're going to have animators are going to be able to explore what's called Drawn to Wonderland. It's going to be a playground with an oversized flower garden with musical instruments, a Mad Tea Party play set, and a Tulgey Wood exploration area. It's all inspired by the original Alice in Wonderland concept art by Disney legend Mary Blair. And it's going to be a whimsical indoor is important, people, for little ones to grow curiouser and curiouser about animation. By the way, it also feeds off of Richard Bushman's original. He, back in 1950s, had drawn a walkthrough of Alice in Wonderland. This is kind of a little bit coming of age to that as well. At any rate, there's also going to be a place where you can learn how to draw your very own Disney character. There's going to be a place for you to visit Disney characters who are going to do meet and greets. I'm really glad to see, because I didn't think that learning to draw Disney characters over at Disney's Animal Kingdom, that needs to be reinvented over there. It doesn't need to have a how to draw Mufasa experience. All of that how to draw a Disney character needs to be brought home to this location. My guess is that they will also probably have a gift shop at the end of it which will allow a place for really high-end Disney animation art to again appear. They've been kind of putting it in different little corners, such as the Tower of Terror. It really needs its own place. Also, interestingly, not only is there this sorcerer hat in front, there is going to, that whole courtyard in front is going to be redone and kind of create more of a park-like setting in it with a lot of trees and a lot of benches. One of the sad things to happen is that the studio archway is going away. In its place is a more accurately depicted. Disney was the one place that didn't have a studio arch for a long time. Instead, it had kind of this signage, and that signage is going to go in its place where the archway was. I have mixed feelings about that, but I really do appreciate the efforts they're trying to make this feel like it really is part of the Disney Animation Studios back home. So I'm excited to see what happens. And again, it all kind of plays out on this idea that Disney is really thinking a lot about its heritage. I'm not saying that this perfectly makes up for the loss of Tom Sawyer Island, the Liberty Bell, or Muppets 3D, but I am certain that they have heard feedback from their strongest fans that Disney history and heritage matter. And I'd like to think that there is much more of this to come. Well, now you see how Disneyland was such a busy experience. I've covered so many things. Had to catch you up on some announcements. Hey, I hope this has made you realize that you need to plan your next trip to Disney. And David and Leah with Zenola Travel can do that in ways that few others can do. They can make your next trip on land or sea an exciting one, or at least a little less stressful. So reach out, contact them at Zenola Travel. There's no charge to utilize their services, but it will save you enormous time getting all the details right. And there are so many details to a Disney vacation. So contact them today. I talk about my Patreon group, the Wayfinder Society. This is a celebration of those many details of Disney, and there's so many more to come, especially in this year's Disneyland 70th anniversary, where we go to different corners of the parks and see some of the hidden details that make the magic come alive. For those of you who want to know more about the business behind the magic, please visit Amazon, where I have links in my show notes, and at DisneyInsights.com to the wonderful world of customer service at Disney, Disney leadership, and you. And then I'm going to really plug out this time my Century of Powerful Disney Insights 100. I thought so much about this book, which I wrote, just published last year as part of the 100th anniversary. It really is a tribute to the Walt and Roy Disney years. And if you really want to know what the challenges and struggles not only were, but how they relate to you, this book, A Century of Powerful Disney Insights 100, Volume 1, The Walt and Roy Disney Years, please pick that up, a copy, because you will love it. It is full of interesting details that even a lot of Disney fans do not know. I never write a chapter that I don't learn something I never knew. That makes certain that you have learned some things that you may not have known. Beyond that, if you're looking to improve your organization, please reach out to me. Need a keynote speaker? Hey, more than just coming up with nice stories, which I do. I talk a lot of Disney stories, but I also provide proven insight and solutions, because I've been out in the trench working with people and doing it, not just hosting a seminar, but doing it. And so I can bring that to your keynote. I can bring that via consulting. I can bring that through so many resources, workshops, seminars, online tools, books, so forth, whether it's a customer service delivery, leadership development, employee engagement. These are real issues people are facing. Contact me today and I can help you. Well, thanks for joining us for this podcast. Know that, as in the title of my organization, Performance Journeys, it's as much about the journey as it is about performance. Find the second star to the right and keep going straight on till you reach it. Follow the compass of your heart and know that with a smile and a song, A little faith, effort, and pixie dust, your dreams can come true. After all, if we can dream it, we can do it. Until next time, bright suns. We'll see you real soon.